What if the greatest victory in American history was won not on a battlefield, but inside the human spirit? In the winter of 1777, the air itself seemed to carry despair. Snow fell relentlessly over the encampment, covering worn-out boots, torn blankets, and the fragile hope of thousands of soldiers. The men who stood there were not the image of a powerful army. They were farmers, blacksmiths, teachers, ordinary people, bound together by an extraordinary idea: freedom. But ideas alone do not keep you warm. The cold cut through their bones like a blade. Many had no proper shoes. Blood from their feet stained the snow, marking a silent trail of suffering. Hunger gnawed at their stomachs, and disease spread faster than any enemy. It would have been easy to quit. In fact, many believed it was already over. The revolution had begun with fire and passion, but now it faced its harshest test, not from a foreign enemy, but from within. Doubt crept into the minds of even the strongest men. Letters from home spoke of hardship, fear, and uncertainty. Supplies were scarce, pay was non-existent, and yet something remarkable happened. Instead of breaking, they endured. Among them was a young soldier named Daniel Harper, a fictional representation of countless real men whose names history barely remembers. Daniel was just 19 years old. He had never traveled far from his small village before the war. He had never held a weapon until a few months earlier. But now he stood in the freezing wilderness, fighting for something he could not see, touch, or prove would ever succeed: freedom. Daniel often questioned his decision. One night, as the wind howled outside his fragile shelter, he sat with his closest friend, Thomas. The two had grown up together. They had joined the army together, and now they faced the same terrifying reality. "I don't think we're going to make it," Thomas whispered. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He stared at the flickering flame between them, watching it struggle against the cold air. "Do you remember," Daniel finally said, "why we came here?" Thomas let out a bitter laugh. "Because we believed in something." "And do you still believe?" Thomas hesitated. That hesitation spoke louder than any words. Daniel leaned closer to the fire. "I do," he said quietly. "Even now, I do." But belief is not always easy. The next morning, Daniel awoke to devastating news. Several soldiers had died overnight, some from illness, others simply from the cold. The camp grew quieter with each passing day, as if hope itself was fading. Desertion became more common. Men slipped away in the night, choosing survival over sacrifice. No one blamed them. How could they? Staying meant risking everything for a cause that seemed increasingly impossible. Daniel himself came close to leaving. One evening, he packed his small bag. He looked around at the camp, the broken tents, the exhausted faces, the endless suffering. Was this really worth it? He thought of his family, his mother's smile, his father's worn hands, the simple life he had left behind. He could go back. He could survive. No one would judge him. But as he turned to leave, he saw something that stopped him.
An older soldier sat alone, carefully repairing his torn uniform with trembling hands. His face was lined with age and hardship, yet his eyes held a quiet determination. Daniel approached him. "Why are you still here?" Daniel asked. The old man looked up, surprised by the question. "Because someone has to be," he replied. Daniel frowned. "But we're losing. Everyone knows it." The old man smiled faintly. "Losing is just a moment. Giving up is forever." Those words struck Daniel like lightning. Losing is temporary. Giving up is permanent. Daniel slowly unpacked his bag. He stayed. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The winter showed no mercy. Yet something began to change, not in their conditions. The cold remained, the hunger persisted, but in their spirit. A transformation took place, subtle yet powerful. The soldiers began to train more intensely. They supported each other, shared what little they had, and refused to let despair define them. A sense of unity grew stronger than any weapon. They were no longer just individuals. They were a force. Daniel felt it too. The fear that once consumed him began to fade. In its place came something stronger, purpose. He realized that the battle was not just about land or politics. It was about identity. Who were they? What kind of future did they want? And what were they willing to endure to achieve it? One night, as the camp slept, Daniel stood outside, looking up at the stars. The sky was clear, the silence profound. For the first time in months, he felt calm. He understood something deeply important. Victory was not guaranteed, but meaning was, and that was enough. When spring finally arrived, it brought more than just warmer weather. It brought opportunity. The army, once on the brink of collapse, emerged stronger. Hardened by suffering, united by purpose, they were no longer the same group of struggling individuals. They had become something greater. A turning point came soon after. The soldiers, including Daniel, were called into action. The battle ahead would be critical. Failure could mean the end of everything they had fought for. But this time, something was different. They were ready. As Daniel stood in formation, he glanced around at his fellow soldiers. These were the same men who had once been weak, cold, and hopeless.
Now they stood tall, not because their circumstances had improved, but because they had. The battle was fierce. Chaos filled the air, smoke, shouting, the clash of forces. It was overwhelming. Daniel felt fear rise within him, but he did not let it control him. He remembered the winter. He remembered the suffering, and he remembered the choice he had made to stay. That choice gave him strength. Step by step, moment by moment, the soldiers pushed forward. They fought not just with weapons, but with conviction. And slowly, against all odds, they began to win. The victory was not immediate, it was not easy, but it was real, and it changed everything. Years later, Daniel would look back on that winter as the defining moment of his life, not because of the suffering, but because of what it revealed. True strength is not found in comfort, it is forged in adversity. The story of that winter would become a symbol, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope can survive. That ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things when they refuse to give up. Daniel returned home after the war. He was no longer the same young man who had left. He had seen hardship beyond imagination. He had faced fear, doubt, and despair. But he had also discovered something far more powerful: resilience. As he walked through his village, he saw life continuing as it always had. Children played, families worked, the world moved on. Yet Daniel knew something had changed forever, not just in the nation, but in himself. He understood that the true victory was not just independence, it was the proof that courage, unity, and determination could overcome even the greatest challenges. Years later, when people asked him about the war, they expected stories of battles and triumphs. But Daniel always told them about the winter, because that was where the real battle had been fought, not against an enemy, but against the temptation to give up. And that is where the greatest victories are always won. This story is not just about the past, it is about a universal truth.
Every person faces their own winter at some point in life, a time when everything feels impossible, when giving up seems like the only option. But history teaches us something powerful. The people who change the world are not the ones who never struggle. They are the ones who keep going, even when everything tells them to stop. So when you find yourself in your own winter, remember Daniel. Remember the soldiers who stood in the snow with nothing but belief to keep them going. And ask yourself one question: will you give up or will you endure?